Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Laura Beck with the Eden Alternative. So excited that you're joining us today because I've been really looking forward to spending some time with our guest today, Chris Field. And I'd just like to tell you a moment about Chris. Chris is a really special guy. He's been challenging complacency and disrupting the status quo most of his life. His most important disruption to date is the Mercy Project, a nonprofit he started to rescue children from human trafficking in Ghana, Africa. And its innovative approach has drawn international attention and earned the prestigious Norman Borlaug Humanitarian Award. Now, to date, the Mercy Project has rescued more than 200 children and returned them to their families and provided them with education that will transform their future for generations to come. Now, Chris is the author of 2 books. Disrupting for Good is his first, and one that came out just last month is A Billion Hours for Good. Now, Chris has given 2 TED Talks and has been featured in numerous national media publications. He's also a business coach and teaches business at Texas A&M University. And it's going to be an immensely interesting conversation about how all of us can be disruptors, no matter what work we're doing, and what that really means to be one. And so, Chris, thank you for being here.
Laura, absolutely. I'm truly honored. I feel like this is overdue. We've been waiting for this and truly honored to be able to be here with you.
Well, right back at you. And, gosh, our relationship began, our getting to know each other, right, a couple of years ago, maybe even closer to 3, when we were trying to plan a conference for 2020 that never happened, right? And you were going to be joining us. So here you are. I'm so glad.
Happy to be here.
Now, I'm just going to jump in and just start by mentioning that I watched your TED Talk, the first one, on being a disruptor. And in that talk, you talk about what a disruptor is and how it differs from being a destructor. Now, I'd love it if you'd start out by kind of telling us how you define what a disruptor is and what is that distinction?
Yeah, absolutely. So I became really interested in the idea of disruption a number of years ago and found the work by Christensen, who was a Harvard professor who just passed away about a year ago. And he's kind of the thought leader. He coined the term disruptive innovation. And what I became interested in, though, was first, Christensen's work almost exclusively dealt with the business world, the for-profit world. Second, all the work you find around disruption almost exclusively is around the actual disruption. There's almost nothing that's talking about the people who cause the disruption, the disruptors, if you will. So I became infatuated because I thought, wow, first, I was like, this kind of describes me. Like, I'm a disruptor, and I've never really had a name for that. And honestly, when I was younger, it wasn't always a positive thing. I mean, I got in a lot of trouble for some negative disruption and some positive disruption, but it's not always welcomed. But finally, I felt like when I started studying this, I was like, wow, this really helps me. It kind of gave me a new name. It made me feel like that was something that was going to help me understand my own self. But I still didn't really know who is a disruptor, what makes a disruptor. And so I went on this deep dive, just became infatuated with this idea, went out and found all of these stories of ordinary people who disrupted for good. And in that first book, I have 2 definitions of a disruptor. The first is that a disruptor is someone who's uncomfortable with a truth. So they show up, take action, and stay until a new and better truth is born. And then the second one is a disruptor dismantles accepted norms and forges unimagined futures. So those 2 things aren't in competition with each other. They're really 2 sides of the same coin. And when you think about disruption, for most of us, it has a negative connotation. If we were ever told that we were causing a disruption or being a disruption, it wasn't positive. I mean, let me assure you, my parents sat through more parent-teacher conferences where the word potential was used than I could ever possibly thank them enough for. So I get it. We have this sense that disruption is negative, but the truth is it's really kind of a neutral word. Now, there is one of the definitions of disrupt is to cause chaos or disorder. I get it. But the other definition right there in Webster's to disrupt is to cause something to not be able to continue in the normal way or to interrupt progress of the normal way. And when we think about it, the normal way, there's a ton of stuff that's the way it is, and we know it really shouldn't be. I mean, you know this firsthand when it comes to the way we engage and interact with those who are further along in life. I mean, there's a lot of norms in facilities and in families and in homes that is not okay. And so disruption really says, hey, when you see that thing, when you identify that thing, name it, own it, write it down, embrace it. And then let's work to do something about it. Let's not assume that something has to be just because it always is. And then to your last part of your question, disrupting is not destructing. And for so many of us, if you look on social media right now for 5 minutes, you're going to find that we've got people who are professional destructors. I mean, they can tear down somebody else's idea. They can say how awful and silly, and they can, grab one word here and an implication that wasn't there, and they can turn into a whole big wall of text. Those people are a dime a dozen, and those people don't deserve any of our energy. The reality is disruptors, real disruptors, yeah, they tear stuff down, they dismantle, but only when they're willing to show back up and do the hard work of building something better in its place. And that's really what differentiates disruptors from a destructor. Is it's easy to tear down. Will you stay and build something better than what was there before?
Love it so much. In fact, I'm not the only one who loves what you're saying. There's been a request, if you wouldn't mind repeating each one of those definitions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll see if we'll see if Chris can capture them or not. But go for it.
I'll say them slowly. So I want to stay on Chris's good side. So the first definition of a disruptor is someone who is uncomfortable with a truth. So they show up, take action, and persist until a new and better truth is born. The second is that a disruptor dismantles accepted norms and forges unimagined futures. So by the way, that first one, Laura, I mean, when I go into a business to consult, that first definition, we'll spend an entire day walking through, let's talk about these uncomfortable truths. Now let's be willing to show up. Now let's create an action plan. And then what is that new and better truth that we're aiming for? And I mean, you would not believe just that simple conversation. I mean, even if you're the folks that you're working with that have employees in their organization, sitting down and just having this brief conversation and saying, hey, what are some of these uncomfortable truths? What are some of these things that we all know they're there? We see them, we hear them, we cover our, we close our ears and we put our hands across our eyes and say, la, 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 la. But the reality is they're not going away. They don't go away on accident. They're not going to go away without some intention. And then, of course, the second one, a disruptor dismantles accepted norms and forges previously unimagined futures. And again, this is a different way of saying the same thing, right? You can look at most any situation and say, hey, I always use the example in a slide when I've got slides in a keynote presentation. I show a picture of a segregated water fountain. So there's a little black girl taking a drink from a water fountain that says colored above it, and then an empty water fountain 6 feet away, 8 feet away that says whites. And I always make the point to people in the audience. I say, listen, we have to understand this was the normal way. Yeah. I mean, this was normal. I live in the South. My father was in first grade. I'm only 38 years old, and my father was in first grade when his school was integrated. And so we can't act like, things are fine. Why would we want to mess things up? It's like, no. We are surrounded, just like our parents and grandparents were. We are surrounded by uncomfortable truths. Yes, they become normal, too many of us, but that doesn't make them okay. And that little voice inside of us, that little part inside of us, it says, gosh, this isn't okay. Like, we have to become tuned in to that voice. And, like children, when children see something that's not okay, when my daughter was 7 and she sees a guy digging through a trash can, she says, Dad, why is he digging through the trash? That's gross. I said, sweetie, he's probably trying to find something he can sell to make some money, or find something he can eat so he's not hungry. And she said, well, we should give him some food then. I said, I don't have any food. We don't have any food. She said, well, we should give him some money. And I said, honestly, I don't even know if I have any cash with me. And she says, I saw that $5 bill when you opened the glove compartment earlier. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're right. And so she takes that $5, walks 3 houses down. This isn't our neighborhood. It's a neighborhood we were doing a project in. She takes it down, hands to them. They have a 5-minute conversation. She's 7 years old. I'm like, I'm just out of earshot. I have no idea what's happening. She comes back and she says, Dad, that guy was so nice. And I said, oh, that's great. I bet he was. And she said, he told me that he's looking for stuff that he can sell, because a lot of the college students in this town will throw away pretty nice stuff whenever they move out of their houses for the summer. And so he can sell it and get a little bit of money to help him. And I said, that's great. And she said, he told me I was the first person who's ever stopped and talked to him. And it was like 7-year-olds, they don't have to be taught to be disruptors for good, because they're like, oh, that shouldn't be like that. I should do something about it. Not, that shouldn't be like that. Well, why didn't this person and these facilities and this government program, and well, I would accept. They don't do that. They just say, that's not okay. We should do something about it. And so I think there's so much we can learn from young kids, because they're naturally still willing to disrupt, because they're not afraid of failing and they're not afraid of looking silly.
I absolutely love that story, right? The way that children end up unlearning what is innately powerful, right? Just
100%.
Because they're influenced by culture. And so this brings us back around to what we do at the Eden Alternative, which is to influence and transform the culture of care as we know it. And so I just want to grab the comment from Lisa Kendall. It says, voila, culture change. If we could pop that up on the screen. It says, when people can face the uncomfortable truths and are willing to take action to create a better reality. And, that's why we got you here, Chris, because, we all need to be reminded. We might be in this work, but, we get too close to what we do. And, I think it's really powerful to unpack and be transparent about our role and our call to action as disruptors. So I thank you so much for sharing that. So powerful. And so now I think it's super important for people to hear your transformation and evolution into being a disruptor for good. So what would you like to tell us about that unfolding for you?
Yeah, so for me, that really happened. I feel very fortunate. I was just 19 years old when these 3 things happened in a very short time period. I ran my first marathon, completely untrained, chasing after a girl that I liked. Literally ended up, in that case, chasing after her because she definitely beat me in that marathon because she had trained. And then a few months later, I ran for mayor of my hometown of 55,000 people. And then a few months after that, I was hired to direct a camp for inner city kids in Texas, basically a camp for kids who couldn't afford to go to camp. And all 3 of these things happened between February and August of my freshman year of college. So I was 19 and a half to the end of being 19. I turned 20 a few months after that last thing when I got hired at the camp. And so for me, all 3 of those things in totally different ways were things that the normal prevailing thought was that you can't do this. Like, you can't run a marathon untrained. That's crazy. You don't have any background as a runner. You can't run for mayor of your hometown at 19. Oh, okay. Well, so you signed up, but you have no chance. And then I placed 3rd out of 5 candidates. And then the local newspapers, basically they didn't recommend me, but they wrote as much about me as they wrote about the guy that they recommended. And, we're blown away by the way I came into the interviews and the knowledge base that I took on. And that's thanks to my mother, by the way, who they didn't know I was running for mayor. My mom and dad didn't know I did that. I'd already signed up by the time they found out. So my mom very sternly told me I better not embarrass her. So I was like, all right, Mom, you okay, I appreciate the vote of confidence. So I went back and did my homework, but people said, you can't do that. And then the camp, I was barely older than some of the campers. I mean, we had 18-year-old campers at that camp. And that board of directors, they saw something in me, and the camp needed some new energy. I mean, it needed an overhaul of leadership. And so the old guy was rolling out. He was 26 and full-time. I was 19. I was not going to quit college, so they knew I was going to do it as a part-time 19-year-old, and they saw something in me, and they had enough of an uncomfortable truth that they said, hey, we think this energy of Chris, we think he can do it. They believed in me before I even believed in me. I didn't even want to apply for the job when they asked me to, because I didn't think I was capable of doing it. And then they hired me. So those things all happened to me when I was 19. And from that moment on, every time I saw something around me, small or big, that wasn't the way it should have been, instead of looking around waiting for somebody else to do it, I had this ridiculous, almost unnatural amount of confidence that I was like, oh, somebody should do something about that. Like, okay, I'll do something about that. Okay, hey, I'm going to get 30 people. These are the things when people are like, oh, have you done this before? I'm like, no, I never done this before, and it might not work. But that's okay, because you know what's definitely not going to work? Me sitting here saying somebody else should do something about this. That is never going to work. So let me just try to jump in and see what I can do. And then, of course, just like anything in life, you start getting some wins, start snowballing, you get more confident, people start to believe in you more. And then you almost feel like you could take on the world. And it's not arrogance. People who don't like me definitely would call it arrogance, but it doesn't feel like that for me. It's just a willingness to do something that I know other people aren't going to step up and do. And when I was 27, I read a book about child trafficking in Ghana, Africa. And I was like, oh my gosh, we were pregnant with our first baby. I was like, I can't bring a child into the world, know this thing is happening, and never have done anything about it. Like, I need to understand this. I got to do something about this. So I Googled the author, called her, and I didn't know her, found her phone number, called her, asked her to go to Africa with her. 3 months later, I showed up in Ghana, went out on the world's largest man-made lake, started meeting little boys and girls who were child slaves, was heartbroken, came home, started raising money, raised $75,000 on nights and weekends with family and friends to give to this other organization. And in that year, realized nobody was solving the problem sustainably, and didn't feel great about that. And so I was faced with this other decision, like, shoot, what do I do now that I know this? Once you know, we do better, right? We've all heard that over and over. Once you know, you do better. Exactly. And I was like, well, shoot, now I know, what am I going to do? And so I quit my job and started this organization to try to help these kids. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no money. By that point, I had a 6-month-old baby and absolutely clueless, but compelled to do something. And now 11 years later, we've rescued 200 kids out of human trafficking. Everyone said that we would need to put those kids into orphanages. We didn't like that because of the circumstances of their being trafficked. So we reunited them back into their families. Never had a child re-trafficked. 201 kids returned home, 201 kids still with their families. And yeah, it's more expensive. It's more complex. It's more work than just putting them in an orphanage, but we were never comfortable. That was another uncomfortable truth for us, was that we think the family unit is most powerful when we can keep it together, when that's at all possible. And so in this case, it was possible. It's just going to be harder and more expensive, but that felt worth it to us. So that's a little bit about my journey of disruption. There's a bunch of other fun, silly, crazy stuff I've done, but for now, I think that gets at answering your question.
Thank you. That is such a powerful story. There's a lot of things that pop out to me, and I'm going to hold on to them as we continue, because I think there's going to be some really obvious places to connect those dots. But what I want to start off with here, because I would think maybe listening to your story might bring this up for some people, is, yeah, we are definitely a group of change agents here at the Eden Alternative and in the larger culture change scene. And so every day we're asking our teammates to dismantle accepted norms and forge unimagined futures. Now, we've already established that the work that we do requires us to identify as disruptors, but what advice do you have for the rule followers or the people who want to, like I was raised, to be a good girl. Like I actually don't have trouble with the idea of disruption, but I can imagine some people might be like, that feels edgy. It's a little daunting. It's even a little threatening to me. And so how can someone who might struggle with a history that might make them feel that way learn to discover and embrace their inner disruptor?
Yeah, great question. I mean, this is a common, that person you described is, I mean, that's my wife, that's other people around me. I know a lot of those people. So I think the first thing we have to understand when we think in these terms is that we would not be where we are today if it had not been for the disruptors before us. So the reason we don't have white and black water fountains in America, in the South, is because of disruptors. People don't give up control out of the goodness of their own hearts. People give up control when it's pride from their hands. And the truth is that it doesn't get pride from people's hands. New truths are born without causing a ruckus sometimes, without being on the edge, without demanding better. And that's just the truth. I mean, you could look at so many women gaining the right to vote in 1919. That didn't happen on accident. That happened because women demanded the right to vote, because they disrupted the norm. They disrupted the status quo. So we wouldn't be where we are, first of all, without disruptors. That's the first thing. So if you choose to disrupt, you could be assured you're in great, great company. Now, the problem is we like disruption when we look at it in the rearview mirror. Nobody ever likes it when it's happening in the present moment, because it's going to require some level of agitation. It's going to require some bit of uncomfortability. And by the way, I mean, in A Billion Hours of Good, my new book, I literally have an entire chapter about why it's good to do hard things, because we have lost the ability in America to do hard things. We shy away from doing hard things, and it's at our peril, because at some point a hard thing is going to happen. Yeah. And when we've not exercised that muscle, and it is a muscle, doing hard things is a muscle. When we haven't exercised that muscle and that hard thing comes that we don't choose, it chooses us, we're going to be brought to our knees and feel like we had the wind knocked out of us and not know if we're ever going to be able to breathe again. Now, it's going to still hurt for that person who's exercised that muscle, but they're going to know they've been there before, and they're going to know that they're going to be okay. They can stand up again. They can take some deep breaths, and they're going to be all right. But that doesn't happen by accident. It happens with experience and with intention. A couple of years ago, I asked a piano teacher in my town if she could teach me how to play the piano. I couldn't read a note of music. I'm terrible. I have no musicality, never in the orchestra, never in the band. I can only sing melody if I'm listening very closely. I mean, I am not a musical person, but I really believed that one of the ways we become better human beings is by doing hard things on purpose. And so I wanted to take on this discipline that was really uncomfortable for me, made me feel like a deer learning how to walk. I mean, I was just like stumbling over and over, like what's, every cow eat, it's just like, I mean, I'm like she only taught children. I was the one adult student that she took on. And I'm no great pianist, by the way, at this point, but 2.5 years later, she's taught me how to play, oh my gosh, Für Elise by Beethoven. And it's a beautiful song. And, some advanced pianists could play it in their sleep. They probably learned it when they were 9 years old or something, if they started when they were 4 or 5. But for me, to go from not being able to read music to being able to play Für Elise, I mean, that was huge. That was a Mount Everest thing for me. But it happened because I took 10 minutes a day, 5 days a week, to be uncomfortable. And I sat down at that piano and I made myself be uncomfortable. And so I think that's the first thing is, well, that's the second. Really, the first is you're in good company. The second is we got to do hard stuff. Like that's the only way our muscles for doing hard things grow is that we do hard things, and we don't do them on accident. We do them on purpose. There's a huge difference in those things. And so that's the second thing. The last thing I would say, the number one underlined line in my first book is, this is the fun thing about having a Kindle version of your book, is that you can actually see what people highlighted, which is fun as an author, because you don't know, like as an author, you write 30, 40, 50,000 words. You hope they resonate, but you don't know what's going to land. And the number one most underlined line in my book, Disrupting for Good, is that my life was changed forever when my desire to do great things outgrew my fear of failure.
Can you say it again?
Yeah.
Say it
So
again.
my life was changed forever when my willingness to do great things, or you could say make an impact, outgrew my fear of failing. And I feel lucky that happened for me when I was 19 years old. But I know a lot of adults, a lot of peers, a lot of people I engage with, that fear of failing still drives so many of their decisions, so many of their choices. We take the safe road, the path less traveled, even when we know it's not the best path, even when we know it's not the right path. Sometimes we take it. And there's this line from a song. It says, "The path we walk becomes a road." And, I think some of us, if we're honest and we do some self-reflection, we look back, we started on a path at some point in our lives. We never intended for it to become a road.
Yeah.
Right? In that moment, it was just like, well, for now, because there's these other things, and, I've got, the legislature and the red tape and my ownership group and my employees and the families of my residents, so for now, just for a little bit, we're going to do this. And what we forget is that line, which I can't take credit for. I wish I'd written it, but the path we walk becomes a road. And so many of us, if we stopped and we turned around, we're on a road, and it started as a path, and we never intended for that path to become a road. And now that we're on the road, though, it's pretty freaking comfortable, right? Like
Right.
It's paved. We got gutters. The rain doesn't hurt us because it goes on the side. It feels okay, right? You got the white line in the middle, so you know which side each car is supposed to go on. I mean, it's very different to be on a road than on a path. Very different. But that makes the importance of the paths we choose that much more critical. So that would be my advice for anybody who's kind of struggling with this idea of becoming a disruptor.
Thank you for that. And now I have an opportunity to go back to the story that you shared about your beginnings with the Mercy Project. And this, maybe this will help the people who are a little skittish about the term and taking on the name as a disruptor. So, you've really pointed out that the difference between being a disruptor and a destructor is essentially leaving things better than when you found them, right? And
Right.
when, if people were to dig into your story a little bit more deeply, what they would discover is some of the things that you did to accomplish the release of those 200 children. You built relationships. You took your time. You collaborated with the communities. You didn't come in there muscling around like a white man saying, "I know what's best."
That's right.
You worked hand in hand with people to figure out the best way to proceed. And that included, right? Tell me if I'm not getting this right. Teaching the fishermen some different approaches to what they do so they wouldn't feel like they needed to have those kids under their thumb.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Chris?
Yeah, we taught them a better way to fish with aquaculture or cage fishing that actually made them more money than with the labor of the kids. But the agreement always was, we're going to teach you how to run a business. But when we do, we want you to voluntarily release these children back into their families because we want you to feel like you're part of the solution instead of just being part of the problem.
I mean, how amazing is that? And what a great lesson for the folks listening today in our field about collaboration and teamwork and everybody having a voice at the table, that, everybody walks away a winner, right?
Right.
So that this is, I just want to, just to echo how much impact this conversation is having on people. Kim McCrae says, this is church. So, Thank you, Kim, for the enthusiasm, which I can always count on. So yeah, so that to me is incredibly powerful, that people understand those nuances of your story, because to me, that's the magic of disruption, right?
Right. Certainly. Yeah. And to leave it better, than you found it. And sometimes that means really audacious goals that don't seem reasonable. I mean, I remember when we said very early on Mercy Project that one of our top goals was that we would be completely Ghanaian run, that what we would do is provide funding and creative problem solving, but that we would empower local Ghanaians to solve their own problem. And I haven't had an American living in Ghana now for almost 5 years. The complete organization is run 100% by our 15 amazing Ghanaian staff, and we do exactly what we set out to do. We help them with funding, and we help them with creative problem solving, innovation. But that wouldn't have happened by accident. That was a goal of ours from day one. And a lot of people said you couldn't do it. I mean, and I'm not saying our context is the same as every other context, but I will say there is a whole lot of organizations around the world started by people that look like me more than they look like the people who live in those countries. Yeah. And those places are going on decades of having Americans still running every single facet of the program. And for me, it's not sustainable. I mean, the goal was to work ourselves out of a job and then to go on and find the next problem, And so anyways, I think it's important distinction to make. And it starts with being willing to disrupt from front to back, right? It wasn't enough just to disrupt, to say, let's go to Ghana and help. We wanted to create a disruptive process. And then once we'd created that disruptive process, we wanted that process to be managed in a disruptive way. So all of it stacks on each other to just snowball into a really powerful effect.
Excellent. So there's a comment here from Karen Klink. I'm going to put it up and we'll see how you respond to it, Chris.
Okay.
She says, Laura, when I'm disruptive at my mom's memory care, my sister says, they're never going to change. Why do you bother?
Yeah, great question. I mean, they may never change, Karen. We don't know. We don't get to control that. We can't control people's responses. All we can control is when we see something we know is not okay, that we're willing to name that truth. Now, Karen, I'm sure you do the second part of this, but I want to make sure everyone else remembers we don't just name the uncomfortable truth. We offer ourselves to show up and to help persist until a new and better truth is born. And so, what I love is anytime I identify a problem or an opportunity, that I always like to follow it up with exactly what I'm willing to do to create that new problem and opportunity. I remember, just as an example, here in my hometown, after one of the police shootings about 5 years ago in Dallas, where I'm about 3 hours from Dallas, there was a lot of tension in my Black community in my town and with the police department. They had this big roundtable discussion, and I showed up as a listener. I was one of the only white faces in the room that wasn't a police officer, but I'd done a lot of work in the Black community, and this was an important part of my life. And so I wanted to listen. I wanted to advocate. I wanted to be there as a presence of care. And in that conversation, something came up. I had the opportunity to really briefly say something, and it resonated with the residents of the community and with the police department, so much so that the police department reached out to me privately and asked me if I could come in and have a meeting with them because they wanted to try to do a few of the ideas that I had suggested in the meeting. Well, in that meeting, it was disclosed to me that there's no budget in my local police department for this kind of community building, which is an atrocity, but I'll get back to that another day. But I said, okay, these ideas I had, these things that the Black community seemed to say would feel really meaningful to them, like a back to school picnic, co-hosted by the Boys and Girls Club and the police department for all the children in the neighborhood. Like, what do we think these things are going to cost? And it came out to, like, let's call it $3,000, something, $4,000. So I said, okay, my wife and I'll do the first $1,000. I'll go on social media and I'll raise you the other $3,000. And you guys need to commit, though, that you're going to show up, and I'll be there, and let's do this. And so I went on social media, made a post, had the money within 2 hours, gave it to the local police department. 30 days later, a group called the Concerned Black Men are grilling burgers next to policemen off duty. And that wasn't going to solve every problem, but it was a beginning place. And it was easy to sit in the room and say, you should, you should, you should. It was something altogether different to say, and because I believe so much in this, I'll also show up and, in this case, literally put my money where my mouth is. So they may never change, Karen. I mean, that's just the truth. But you still got to do what you know is the right thing to do. And I think it's going to be powerful for you to see what you don't know, Karen. What we'll never know is who's watching us when we disrupt and what the ripple effects of those disruptions are going to be. So maybe someone leaves that facility where your mom is. And so you feel like it was a loss because that disruption you were pushing for never happened. But what you don't know is that an assistant manager went to a new job and that management was more receptive to disruption. And because you had pushed with solutions instead of just problems, she had language and ideas and innovation that she would have never had herself. And she may even reference you. I knew a daughter of a lady in my old facility, and here's some ideas she had. I love those ideas. We were just never able to implement them. So your disruption has ripple effects in other places that you may never understand. And we have to trust that and just keep showing up and doing the right thing because it's the right thing, not because of how people respond to us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I just want to highlight Lisa Kindle's comment because I think it's so germane to the work we do in the field that we're in. And that is showing up as a listener and how powerful she felt that statement that you made was. And it's such a simple thing. And yet people struggle with it so much. And it's so very, very important anytime you're trying to affect meaningful change. So I just wanted to make sure we highlighted that. Powerful. All right. Here's my next question. You actually have done 2 TED Talks. Maybe some people aren't aware of that. There's the second one that I'm referencing is Why Do Questions Make Us So Uncomfortable? And that's the title of it. And in that TED Talk, you touch on the willingness to experience uncertainty and how important that is. So let's connect some dots. How does this factor into our ability to serve as a disruptor?
Yeah, so that was a really fun TED Talk because the topic for the whole conference was why. And I actually wrote my entire TED Talk in questions. It was like 107 questions in a row that I asked with no statements, only questions. And then I took words from those questions to create a closing statement that had come with one piece of each of the words. So that was kind of fun. But here's the reality is that we don't know what's going to come. I mean, that's just the truth. Is anybody who tells you they've got some crystal ball or they've got one of those little 8 balls that you can ask a question and shake it up, you know, that a lot of us had when we were kids. Nobody has the answers to those things. The weather people can't predict the weather. Stock market people can't predict the stock market. You know, people in Vegas are as good as anybody when it comes to predictions, and they didn't know anything that was going to happen. They didn't know Katie Ledecky was not going to place in the 200 meter a couple of days ago. You could have made a lot of money betting on the young girl from Australia. So even the people whose profession it is to know, they don't know. We're all making the best guesses we can. And for us, what we have to realize as disruptors, we're going to have to learn to live with a certain amount of uncertainty. We have to, because if we wait until the path is cleared, if we wait until the fog has lifted, if we wait until all the conditions are just right in every single way, we'll never do anything. And we see this in people all around us. We see people who keep moving the goalposts over and over and over. They say, well, when this happens, well, when that happens, and then, well, I didn't know this and I didn't know that. And we have a lot of people that have wasted away a lot of their lives waiting for the conditions to be perfect. Here's the truth. There's never going to be another day as good as today to start doing the thing you know to be right and good and true. That's just the reality. And the same is going to be same tomorrow And then it's going to be true on Friday and Saturday and Sunday and Monday. There's never going to be a day as good as today to start doing what you know is good and true and right. And so we have to just act. And that doesn't mean we act frivolously, or doesn't mean we're reactive, or we blow up or explode. I mean, we need to use discernment. We need to be wise. We need to pick our battles. But being paralyzed from movements, being worried about failing, saying, well, I'll do it once I have all the answers, that's just a recipe for us to be miserable and one day sitting in a rocking chair with a lot of regrets about our life, because the best time is now. So that thing that's burning inside of you, start that journey. And what you do today, you're probably going to look back at it and laugh. I don't. When I look at my first 6 months at Mercy Project, I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I knew now what I knew then. But you know what? I would have never known now what I know then if I hadn't done those first 6 months. I mean, one of my favorite things that I tell people, the only way forward is forward. I mean, that's the only way. So when you say, well, I want to go there. Okay, let's go there. Well, not yet. Not yet. There's a lot of things I have to consider. Like, no, not really. Like, if that's where you want to go and that's the good and right and true thing, we got to start moving forward. I'm not telling you that we have to sprint, but we can start walking. We can start walking, and we may course correct a few times. But if that's really your North Star, and that's really the thing you say matters most, we can start heading that way, and we can fix any problems we come along as we get to them. But let's not sit down and be comfortable when we say, well, that's really where I need to get. I'm just, there's a lot of complicating factors. No, really the complicating factor is us being unwilling to step out in that uncertainty.
Yes, absolutely. All right. So now that we have had a chance to lay the groundwork to really understand what this is all about, to connect some dots with your own journey, to highlight some aspects of disruption that people can really relate to if they're in the aging services field and they're really committed to meaningful change, you have a thing called a map of disruption. And this sounds like a powerful tool that could be, really essential for the people who want to take some things away from today's conversation. How would you tell us about the map of disruption?
Yeah, so the map of disruption is really just taking all the things I just talked about and moving them from theoretical to practical. So what I didn't want to do in my first book was get everybody hyped up at a pep rally, and then we spill out into the hallway and we forget why we were so excited at the pep rally. And by the way, before I forget, I have to look it up while we're talking, so forgive me, but I'm actually going to give you all, and Chris, listen up, because I'm going to give this to you for you to put on the screen. I have a physical map of disruption. And if anybody listening wants to text the word disruption to the number 44222, it will actually prompt you for your email address and send you that map of disruption automatically. So texting the word disruption to the number 44222 will actually prompt you for your email, and then you can get that map of disruption. It's a PDF, and it's basically what I'm about to describe to you. It's a physical copy of this, and this is exactly what I use for trainings that I do. This is what I do when I go in and do workshops, business consulting, etc. I was in Arkansas last week, and everybody had this map of disruption on the table in front of them. So disruption map is really taking MAP. M stands for making a commitment. A stands for action plan, and P stands for persistence. And the first, we have to name those uncomfortable truths. We got to be honest about those things that we know are not the way they should be. Those things where the normal progress is not okay. It's not acceptable. We know those things. We have them in our hearts. We have them in our heads. We have them in our minds. We got to actually say them out loud. We got to stop acting like they're not there. And we know this is what the Eden Alternative does so well when it comes to conversations around aging, is these things nobody wants to talk about. The way that in so many ways we do not have a culture of honor and respect once somebody reaches a certain age. We think they're no longer functional. We treat the older population in this country like we treat televisions or cell phones. That once you're no longer the latest, greatest thing that can help me, then I'm done. I'm done with you. I don't need you anymore. And that comes at a huge loss for us. There's an enormous amount of loss in that. And I think one of the ironies to me is there are unspeakable amounts of wisdom and just life lessons that don't have to be learned the hard way if we had the humility. I mean, I would contend you could walk into any aging facility, and I don't care where it is, pick one on a map that has 50 to 100 residents. And without knowing anything about that aging facility, I could walk in, interview all 50 to 100 people, and find some incredible story about each of those 50 to 100 that would make for a great book. And I think that's just true because that's a lot of years of experience. There's some cool stuff. Now, they're not all going to be the craziest thing, but people say, well, I haven't had that interesting of a life. It's like, absolutely. There's got to be. Well, one time I do remember when I was 4 years old and the circus came to town, and all of a sudden now it's like, are you kidding me? That's incredible. Like, what? How did I not know this before? And so I think for us, making that commitment to actually embrace and own some of those truths that we know are there. The second is not just to have those truths written down and think that solves the problem. That doesn't solve the problem. That just names the problem, which is important, but it's not the ending place. The action plan is when we actually start putting into practice, what do I need to do to go from where I am to where I know I need to be? Mm-hmm. So the action plan, I like to keep it very simple. So we have our uncomfortable truth, right? We write it down. This is my truth that makes me uncomfortable. And then my action plan, I like to say, what is something I could do today, tomorrow, next week, and next month? They're going to move me closer to a new and better truth, because the today is going to just get me moving. It's going to get me out of theory and it's going to get me into action. Tomorrow, I'm going to be able to think a little more about that and maybe block out a whole 30 minutes or a half hour instead of just 10 minutes today. Next week, I may be able to block out a couple hours. I may be able to pull in a couple other people for a meeting. Next month, I may be able to pull in more stakeholders. And by the way, by next month, I'm further along than I am today because I've done today, tomorrow, and next week. And then that just builds on each other. And so at the end of that 1 month action, you're going to have a whole different set of action plans, because right now you don't even know what you don't know. I don't even know what I don't know. So the action plan, what can I do today, tomorrow, next week, and next month to turn my uncomfortable truth into a new and better truth? And then finally, by far the least sexy and the most important part of the disruption map is persistence. It's persisting to transformation. It's Karen's question of continuing to push and to ask for good and to challenge in a positive, kind way the things we know not to be true. Not once, not twice, not 5 times. It was almost 750 days from the time I started Mercy Project to the time we rescued our first group of trafficked children. And those 200 kids that are at home now, back with their biological families, would never have made it home if somewhere in that 750 first days, I had gotten frustrated and annoyed and not been willing to persist. But for me, I knew what was at stake. I kept that why in front of me. And so for all of us, we have to remember why we do what we do, why it matters, who it matters to, and how it matters to them. And when we remember that, then we're willing to persist. We're willing to stay at it. We're willing to keep doing that hard work, even when we don't see the results. But the commitment and the action plan only work when we're willing to persist to transformation. So that's the map of disruption.
Oh, so brilliant. And so if we were just to recap that, just uber simple, right? M is for
make a commitment. Yep. Action plan, which is today, tomorrow, next week, next month. And then persist, which means remembering your why. So put it somewhere where you can see it every single day and remind yourself what's at stake. Why are you doing what you're doing? And keep that in front of you at all times.
Love it. Chris, so powerful. I know that we made a commitment, speaking of, to you today to make
Sure.
sure that we wrapped up at 5 till. And before
No
we
problem.
begin to wrap up, I really want to make sure that people can, if they want to learn more about what you do and what you teach about disruption and becoming a disruptor for good, where can they go? What should they look for?
Yeah, so both of my books are on Amazon in addition to other places. So Disrupting for Good is on Amazon, my first book. My most recent book, which came out about 6 weeks ago, A Billion Hours of Good, is also on Amazon. I'm on all the socials that you could expect somebody might be on. My handle at all those is going to be Disruption Chris. So I always enjoy conversations there. And then my website is meetchrisfield.com. So I've got a contact form on there if people want to reach out to me with questions, or if there's an opportunity to work together, collaborate in some way. So I love to do that. I think the work that you all do, by the way, I mean, I want to take a minute. This was a lot about me, which is fine. But to be honest, the work that you all do matters so much. And that's both the Eden Alternative and everybody who's on this call. I mean, there's a real crises, for lack of a better word. And I really think that's true in the way we've handled aging in this country. And if you talk about, I mean, that's the way you found me, Laura, is that I gave a keynote at the American Healthcare Association that was pretty disruptive in that space, and one of, I mean, just the ideas that I had that day were, so much of this work, it's so good and it's so valuable, and there's a lot we can do better, and it's going to require some disruption for us to do it. And so I just want to honor and thank everybody who's on this call that's doing that work, because the people you're valuing, the people you are lifting up, the people you are honoring, that's us. And you're honoring not just our parents and grandparents, but you're honoring our future selves, and you're honoring our children's future selves, and you're showing our children and grandchildren that this can be done so much better than it's been done. And it's just a beautiful thing, when you work for a future that you may never get to participate fully in, is one of the most unselfish things I think we could ever do as human beings. So I applaud everybody. I thank you for your good work, and please take care of yourselves. Ask for help when you need help. Take a break when you need to take a break. You can't pour from an empty cup. So please make sure you're taking care of yourself, and believing that even when you don't hear it, there are a lot of people cheering you on and believing in you. And I speak on behalf of a lot of people I know when I say that.
Chris, thank you. It's people like you that keep our pilot lights lit, and we got to make sure they're still burning. Sometimes,
Absolutely.
you know how it is. And I
Absolutely.
just wanted to end on Chris McCrae. Chris McKay. So I'm mixing up my Kims and my Chris's. Kim McCrae. Right. Kim McCrae said, we're just quoted you, Chris. We are honoring our future selves. And let's end on that note. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Chris, cannot thank you enough. And I look forward to it another time.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. And have a great rest of the day. Keep disrupting for good.